Welcome to the Cup of Joe Wrestling Show.
Cup of Joe Wrestling Show
with Joey Harris, a podcast for the wrestling fan on the go.
Welcome, everyone, to the Cup of Joe Wrestling Show. I'm your host, Joey Harris, and we are broadcasting from makeshift studios in the shadow of South Central Virginia. You can follow the show on Twitter and Blue Sky at Cup of Joe Pod. Email the show at cupofjoewrestlingshow@gmail.com. You can support the show at paypal.me/cupofjoepod. I am also on Cash App and Venmo at the Joey Harris if you would just like to throw me a couple of bucks that way. And of course, patreon.com/babykangaroomedia for bonus episodes of the Cup of Joe Wrestling Show, the Joey Harris Super Show, the Green Room, the Book Club Baristas, and so much more. Just $5 a month for hours of extra content. And folks, back again. And I was telling my guests every morning when I get up, I prepare for my day. And as part of that preparation, I read the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Daily Chronicle. It is, for me, the best pro wrestling Substack going today. And joining me is the author of that publication, Tony Richards. Welcome, Tony.
Hey, Joey, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I don't know what to do with all those great words, but I appreciate it. And, you know, you're the kind of person that we do the work for. I appreciate you reading it and appreciating it and saying all those nice things about it.
Absolutely, Tony. I tell you, as we're recording this, we're in the first week rather of November. But what you did, which I really enjoy in October, was your look at some of the pro wrestling announcers. I think you did one a day.
Yeah.
And it was a lot. In fact, I'm going back. I'm like, there's some that I missed. I got to go back. And I enjoyed reading about some of my favorites and learning about some of the ones I was not as familiar with, and looking also at one of the articles that you put up about your Hall of Fame ballot, I believe, which we will talk about later on, where you were talking about you go from the 1920s to about 1990s or so. That really the end, other than Portland and Memphis, the end of the territories. And so with that, you had all of these different announcers in different places that if you were not in that area, you probably were not exposed to. And so just going back and finding out more about them, I really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much. Well, I tell you, there'll be a longer bio kind of feature article on each one of them coming out. So that's going to land in your email box. I released the first one today on Larry Matuszek of Wrestling at the Chase in St. Louis. And so each one of those 31 guys are going to get their own feature article. And it'll take until January for us to put all that out, one or two a week.
Right.
But what started me thinking about that was people always say, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but they always say, well, Gordon Soley and Lance Russell were the best of the territory announcers. And I'm not disputing that. However, how do you know, and how many of them did you actually see and hear? Which most people didn't. They only saw a handful. And I actually came up with over 70 for that list. And I'm going to put out another list next year. But that was a lot of fun, and I got a lot of great comments on it, a lot of great shares, and a lot of people really, really gave me some good feedback on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine, but you were talking about you came up with over 70. I was just thinking, and I am by no means an expert, but you're talking about some of these territories. Some of them had 2 or 3 different shows as part of the territory. Like Memphis had a show. You could have Nashville have a show, and then and all of that, and they all had different announcers. And the shame of that, from what I see, is that all of that, nobody was recording that stuff. It just went out live, and if you saw it, you saw it. If you didn't, I'm sorry. That's just the way that it was, which gets me to no end. But my history and just different things happen, and a lot of it's to do with my own anxiety that I deal with about life. But what I really wanted to be when I grew up was a pro wrestling announcer. That's what I went to college for. I got my mass comm degree. And like I said, a lot of just life happens, as you know, but
Sure.
That's what really draws me to it. Somebody who, like a Gordon Soley or Lance Russell or Larry Matuszak or you name it, they bring you in, and the wrestling as it is good, but they just add that extra something that just really brings it over the top.
Yeah, they each one of them, and I was talking about that on my podcast this week, the newest episode that's coming out tomorrow. I was doing a Q&A session, and someone wrote in and asked, besides Lance and Gordon, who was, the best announcer. And so I talked about a few people on the list that I thought were really, really good. And to your point, Gordon did a great job because he made you feel like if you were not a fan, if you just turned on Championship Wrestling from Florida one day and found it, you would think, I'm watching a big time real sporting event. He's calling this just like you would hear Jim McKay on Wide World of Sports.
Right.
And Lance, God love Lance, but Lance was, you'll understand this because you grew up in North Carolina and you live in Virginia. Lance was just like when you turned on the Memphis wrestling show, it's almost like your neighbor was doing the show. Like somebody that lived right down the street or right across the fence from you that you talk to all the time, and you just happened to turn on television and there they were calling a wrestling show. And so he made people feel warm and at home, and all of the different announcers had something about them that made them good at what they did.
And that was I don't have I don't get a chance. I'm not on the thing to get the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame ballot, so I don't vote. But that was looking over it and who I would vote for. The non-wrestler category was just so packed this year, and seeing people like Dave Brown and Bob Caudle and so on and so forth be on there. Gorilla Monsoon with that is just those announcers like Lance. I've often heard like Lance and Dave, people were saying they were like watching with your uncle, somebody you would want to watch wrestling on the couch with. And I had Reggie Harp on my show several months ago, and
I love Mr. 605.
Mr. 605, yeah. I'm hoping to see him about 3 weeks from now at WrestleCade.
Oh, cool.
Us talking about Gordon and Bob Caudle at the first Starrcade, and Gordon saying, in a football game, if you take away all of the time between the plays, there's 8 minutes of actual contact in a football game, and these matches are like having 4 or 5 games back to back. That broke it down in such a way where even the average fan was like, I can see that now and why this is so physical. Just having that that ability to lure the fans in.
Well, what's interesting, and I'll tell you a little something about the Memphis show that I think I picked up on it years ago, but most people don't, is that most people think of Lance as the number 1 guy and Dave Brown as the number 2 guy. But if you watch the show and you pay attention, Dave is really the play-by-play guy and Lance is really the color guy.
Right.
Because when the match starts, Lance turns it over to Dave, and Dave actually calls the match, and Lance does the interview and holds the microphone and just throws in a few color comments from time to time, which is not the way we think of them in our minds. We think of Lance and Dave, but really on the show, it was Dave and Lance.
And it's probably because Lance was doing all the interviews, so you see him standing up and, hello, everybody, welcome back to.
And his delivery is so unique, and Dave's delivery is so smooth, but he doesn't stand out, but he actually is just a really good. He's got a more of a Midwestern accent, and he's a He's just kind of a Tom Brokaw kind of delivery, which is an excellent delivery, but it doesn't cause you to go, huh, who's that? Not like
Right.
Lance's folksy delivery.
Right. You may know this. I was trying to figure it out, but I don't know exactly how far back to go. Dave has to be up there with an announcer who was just there constantly for just the longest time.
Yeah, I think 1965 or 66.
Okay.
Lance started calling wrestling in 1955 in Jackson, Tennessee. And then when Roy Welch and Nick Goulas bought Memphis, they started out on WHBQ television in 1959, and they got Big Jack Eaton, who was the sports guy at the television station, to be the host of the show. And I'm not sure how long he hosted, not very long. And then Lance came along. And then when Lance came along in 60 or 61, he then approached Dave Brown, who was the weatherman in, I think, 65. And so really their tenure there was only 25 years or so. Yeah. Lance was there almost 30 years because he left in 89 to go to work for WCW. And Dave was there up through the early 90s.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly when Corey came along and all that switched over, but Dave was there he was there a little over 25 years, I think.
I'm listening to the Gene Jackson's Retro Wrestling Review. They're in 91.
He's a very good friend of mine, Gene.
Yeah, they're in 91 now, and Dave is there with Michael St. John. They before that had done 93, and of course Corey's there at that time doing his best Lance impression.
Michael St. John is a very close, good friend of mine. We haven't spoken in quite some time, but he worked for the same company I worked for when Michael worked in St. Louis back in the early 90s.
Okay.
Michael, I remember him on the Goulas Welch show, when Nick Goulas and Jerry split. Michael St. John worked for Nick's show for a while. I think he worked for Nick during the great feud that Nick Goulas had on his show after the Jarrett split was Randy Savage and Dutch Mantel.
Right.
And Michael St. John, I think, was the host of the show during that feud, if I'm not mistaken. But he worked in Nashville. He was the program director of a station there called Kicks 104. And so it was handy for him because Nick did his shows in Nashville and Jerry did his shows in Memphis.
Okay. All right. But I've already learned so much from you, Tony. But how did you become a wrestling fan?
I grew up in the Tennessee territory, so
there you go. Yeah,
I kind of learned a lot of this by just growing up as a fan. But what was your question?
How did you become a wrestling fan?
1972. I turned on the television one day. Of course, I was a big television geek when I was a kid. Loved it. That's how I learned about the world. Growing up here in the small town that I live in now in Lola, Kentucky. My mom went to work early on when I was born, and so I stayed at my grandmother's a lot. She was a big television fan, so we watched a lot of TV together. And somehow in 1972, I loved comic books and I loved superheroes and things of that nature, And then all of a sudden I turned on the television one day, and here's this real live action. It's like these people on it are like superheroes, but they also are like James Bond too. I mean, the fights and the feuds and the interviews and all. And so I became a fan that way. And then I think I went to my first wrestling card in 74, late 73 or 74. And I was hooked. I was hooked. And I found a neighbor down the road here, just right down the road from where I live now. And he went to the Evansville, Indiana matches on Wednesday night. And then every now and then I could talk my parents to taking me to the Paducah matches on Thursday night. And then when I got into high school and got my driver's license, that's when PAFO came in with ICW. And my high school friends and I went to every PAFO card we could get to. And so we saw Randy Savage and Ronnie Garvin in buildings of about 200, 300 people, just having like what we thought were the matches of the year, you know.
What I have heard is that unless you saw Randy Savage, then that was really the best
Yeah.
Randy Savage. Like the body breaks down because he would just not stop and do all the high risk stuff.
Yeah. I remember meeting Liz Hewlett. I remember meeting her at the popcorn stand. She was selling gimmicks at the gimmick table, selling concessions and selling photos and things of that nature. And before she even went on television, she went on TV there for a while to host the PAFO television show. But Randy, I remember the day, I told this on other podcasts, but I got to be friends with the guy that hauled the ring. And we would talk. We'd stand in the back of the arena and talk. And he said, Randy and Lanny are really brothers. And I'm like, man, it's like you just told me that Christmas isn't real, and he must have known what the angle was going to be, because like the next week on television, Ronnie Garvin did a big expose interview saying Randy and Lanny were brothers. And sort of that was the angle they were going for anyway. So I kind of found out on television the week, and I'm like, I heard about that at the matches last week.
Yeah.
But I had seen actually, just one more thing, sorry, but
no,
I had seen Angelo Poffo in '73 at a promotion in Paducah, Kentucky on television, and I saw him teaming with Lanny when Lanny was breaking in the business. Angelo and Lanny were tag team partners, I think, in '73, '74, and '75. They actually held the World Tag Team Championship in '75. And Randy was there working under a mask as the Spider.
Oh, yeah.
And he was just like 17 years old or something and still playing minor league baseball. Of course, we didn't know it was Randy then.
Right.
But then later on, after he came in ICW, he was, the thing about Randy, that the WrestleMania 3 match is awesome. I would say his ICW matches, if you were just going by what makes that match great, he's a bumper. And when he was in 1980 and 1981, he just bumped all over the place. He bumped out on the floor. He bumped off the top rope. He bumped off he just bumped around for Ronnie Garvin. He had a match with Crusher Broomfield, who eventually became the one-man gang. And that was when George was just learning how to work, I mean, we didn't know that, but George was just kind of in his first early years, and Randy was making him look like $1 million because he was just taking bumps from George, just flying for him, And so, yeah, I would say that's true. If you didn't see the best of Randy Savage if you only saw him in the WWF.
Right. It's funny because and I could be mistaken, and if I am, please forgive me. He's Crusher Broomfield, and Garvin was going by the one-man gang.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And Ronnie actually turned him babyface. He was a heel at first. He was under the power of Randy and Bob Orton Jr.
Yeah.
And Ronnie convinced him to come to the good side. But Ronnie was the one-man gang back then. He wrestled as the one-man gang there through the late 70s and early 80s in Southeastern and in ICW.
Yeah. So
that's when he had dark hair.
Oh yeah. I've seen some pictures, and it kind of throws you off for a second.
But actually, when he was a rookie in his early years, he was blonde. He was a blonde when he first came in the mid 60s, and then he went to the dark hair. Then he went back to the bleached blonde hair when he went to was on TBS.
Okay. So how do you go from being a fan to becoming a wrestling historian?
Well, I never stopped being a fan. I mean, I'm still a fan today. I've always had this life philosophy that whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to put everything I've got into it, and I'm going to make it my focus. And when I was running broadcast companies, that's all I thought about. I mean, I really put everything into my work. When you're the CEO of a company, you don't have time for a lot of extracurricular interests. So I just limited my involvement to being a fan. I went to a lot of matches in the 80s. In 1986, I saw 4 of the Great American Bashes. So I drove around and went to a lot of matches. And then in early 2000s, when I left my last CEO job, I went into consulting and started becoming an executive coach. And so for 20 years or so, I put everything I had into that. I wanted to be the best. I got on the top 100 list of the top consultants and coaches in the United States. And I just worked really, really hard at trying to hone my skills and be good. And about 10 years into that, probably about 10 years ago, I made a list of these books I wanted to write, because wrestling books had started becoming a little bit more plentiful and people were starting to come out with them there around 1999, 2000. There were very few wrestling books until that happened.
Right.
But when they started coming out and people started writing books, and my really close friend Tim Hornbaker was writing some really good books, and I thought, if nobody's writing about these guys, by the time I get to this point in my life, I'm going to write those books. I have a list of about 7 of them. And so the Dory Funk Sr. book I'm working on, that was the first book on my list. If nobody has written a book about him, when I get to this point in my life, I'm going to start writing that book. Same thing with the Jim Barnett book. And so about 2.5, 3 years ago, I said, okay, it's time for me to kind of go into semi-retirement with my consulting practice. I'm going to put everything I got into this historian thing. And the last 20 years or 25 years, or nobody knows how long you're going to live, but let's say I live another 25 years. That's going to be focused on pro wrestling history. And I'm going to write these books. Well, I wrote a couple of business books. I used to write a blog for my consulting practice. I wrote over 800 articles for leadership development, business strategy, all these different things. And so then I thought, I'm going to put my energy into this. Well, when I started thinking about writing the book, I'm thinking, I need to get better as a writer. How can I improve my writing skills so that these books, when I do get to the point of writing them, the last 2 years have been spent researching. I want to be good. So I thought, how can I do that? Well, skills are developed through repetition. You get better by doing something. If you want to be a better golfer, you got to play more golf. If you want to be better bowler, you got to bowl more, right? You have to do it in repetition in order to get better. So I thought, how can I get better at writing? I'm going to have to write a lot. And so I came up with the Daily Chronicle idea. I thought, if I write something every day, then I'll get better as a writer. And I can just tell, I just published, I think tomorrow is the 203rd issue of the Chronicle. So I started it back in March of this year. And I can tell from issue number 1 to issue 203, I've gotten a lot better. And I think probably a year from now, I'll get even better, because continuing to focus, continuing to think through my writing and practice my writing. That's why I really came up with the Daily Chronicle. And then after I started doing that, I started getting really good feedback on that. And people started saying, you ought to have a podcast. Well, okay, I'll add a podcast. So now I've got the Daily Chronicle comes out every day. I've got the feature articles that come out. I write a series called The Evolution of Wrestling. And then I'm doing the announcer series and some of those things, plus the podcast, plus being on shows like your great show here. I'm a pretty busy fella. And I got a ballot from Dave on the Hall of Fame, and I wanted to take it serious. And I thought, well, the way to hold myself accountable and to really take this serious is to let people in on and know who I'm voting for and why I'm voting for them. So that's why that kind of came about. So that's bit of a long-winded answer to how I got here, I guess.
No, that is perfect. And it's funny. I just finished interviewing a little while ago Brian Solomon about his Gorilla Monsoon book.
Oh man, one of my best friends.
And he was saying, because I was like, Brian, because I'm like, you did the Sheep book, and then he did the superheroes book, and now I'm like, not by you, but who would you like to see a book about? And we both had Jim Barnett, and he says, I know somebody that's probably working on a Jim Barnett book, and I'm sure he was talking about you.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. He, the wrestling historian community is a little interesting. We don't like to tell people what we're working on.
Right.
But I've got a little bit different mindset. If I go out here and announce I'm working on this and I'm going to do this, that holds me more accountable to actually do it. I got that from Thomas Edison, who publicly announced he was going to invent the light bulb. And he said, I've got to invent this thing. I've got to make it happen. Because I've stood up in front of all these people and I've said, I'm going to do this. So I have to do it. And so that's just a little accountability trick that I use on myself to make sure that I follow through and do what I said I was going to do. So I sometimes talk too much about what I'm working on, I guess, but it's just a way for me to go, well, I went on Joey Harris' show and said I was writing a Jim Barnett book, so I better get to writing because I said I was going to do it.
I was looking up some of your appearances, and it's in my queue to listen to your Jim Barnett episodes. I guess you did with
Briscoe and Bradshaw.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is on my queue, because many years ago in his short-lived podcast, I loved J.J. Dillon's episode that he did about Jim Barnett, especially his time in WCW in Australia.
Yeah, I got a chance to talk to JJ I interviewed him for my funk book. And I've got I want to interview him again for the Barnett book. But I'll tell you a little story about how that kind of came about. I was in St. Louis this spring at the St. Louis Hall of Fame. And Jerry Briscoe was there. And I had been on Jerry and John's show last fall. I did a Dory Funk Sr. episode with them. And it went 3 hours or something, where I just kind of laid out Dory Funk Sr.'s life and the history of Amarillo wrestling and all that. And Jerry goes, I'm going to be in St. Louis at the Hall of Fame. I want to sit with you and talk about what shows can we do. He goes, you did a great job on Dory Funk. John and I really like you. We like you as a person. We like you as a historian. We want you on our show, and we want you to do more shows with us. And I want to sit with you and have a beer and talk about what kind of shows could we do. So I'm throwing out shows, and the television announcer 31 thing was something I pitched. I said, well, we could do a show about announcers. We could talk about all the different announcers. We could do a show about managers, and we could talk about all the great managers in pro wrestling. And he goes, yeah. He goes, but the Dory Funk thing was so good. What other books are you working on? And I said, I don't really want to say, because I had told no one that I was working on anything but the Funk book. He goes, come on now, tell me what else? I know you're working on something else. I know you're a research addict. You're addicted to research. Like, so what? I said, well, I'm working on a book about Jim Barnett. He goes, Jim Barnett. Oh my God. He goes, oh my God. He goes, I got a great Jim Barnett story, which if you watch the episode, you'll hear all about how the Briscoes and Jim Barnett sold Georgia. But he goes, we got to do that. We got to have you on. He goes, I bet you we can do more than one show about that. And I said, based on the research I have right now, I'll probably have enough for 2 shows. He goes, well, when will you be finished with all? I said, well, I don't know when I'll be finished. Well, anyway, it ended up, we did 4 shows about Jim Barnett. And we did one show like in the 50s, one in the 60s, one in the 70s, and one in the 80s. And just got great feedback. When I went to Waterloo to the Tragos Thez Hall of Fame this year, which Jerry is, that is his project. And so many people, wrestlers and members of the Hall of Fame, all there's like, that Jim Barnett thing was absolutely wonderful. That is great. So then you know what the next question is. What's the next one going to be?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what are you working on? Now tell us what the next one. So I got another Briscoe and Bradshaw series coming up here in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Which was really the third book that I'm working on. But at some point, I'm going to have to stop and work on these books, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I got another show with Jerry and John coming here just real soon.
I was telling Brian about this because we were talking about his monsoon book.
Yeah.
That
Awesome book.
Just finished it today. It was fantastic. I was cramming because I was traveling this past weekend. I was sending you both messages. And he's like, yeah, I can do it, you know, coming up. And so I'm trying to finish the book and finished it today. It's just, like I said, excellent. But when you talk about that early 80s thing, when Vince wants to go national, I said the most important three people that he needed by his side to me were Pat Patterson for like the wrestling mind and the booking philosophy, Jim Barnett with just all the connections that he has, and Gorilla Monsoon with that connection to Vince Senior's company and all of that. So
yeah, and you're right on with that, and we talk about that a lot in the Briscoe Bradshaw series. The one guy you didn't mention that was essential to that, and another guy that I'm voting for in the Hall of Fame, is George Scott.
Right.
George Scott, who had booked Mid-Atlantic Wrestling for all of the 70s pretty much. Pat had a great mind, and he was a great conceptual booker, but George Scott had the relationships. Mm-hmm. And that's also what Jim Barnett had. So if you go back and you think about it, I mean, Vince got George Scott, and he got Greg Valentine, he got Ricky Steamboat, he got Roddy Piper, he got all these guys who were stars in Mid-Atlantic. And then he also got Jim Barnett, and he had all the relationships with all the television stations in America. Every general manager that made decisions about what television show was going to be on their station was very close to Jim Barnett. Mm-hmm. And then the other guy that was key was Jerry Briscoe, because Jerry Briscoe had relationships with all the buildings in the South part of the United States. So when Vince had trouble getting into Florida, he needed Jerry. When he had trouble getting into Georgia, he needed Jerry. When he had trouble getting into North Carolina, he needed Jerry, because Jerry knew all those guys, because he had been in the South and been, he was a partner in Georgia Championship Wrestling, and had been working in the office more and going out and making those relationships and being a road agent and all those things. And so all of those guys, and that's what Vince did better than anybody else back then, was he put a great team together.
Right. And I think that he knew that he needed that if he was going to be successful.
Yes.
And all of that. And I have heard from a lot of people that when that machine started rolling, that nobody could really stop it, because the other people together couldn't decide what they wanted for lunch.
Well, not only that, but they didn't even know how. Through no fault of their own, they all had businesses that had been really successful without a lot of thinking. Mm-hmm. As long as they had a talented, creative booker, they were going to be fine. But when the paradigm changed, and the paradigm changed when the technology changed, when the paradigm changed, and now the whole world was available as an audience, all the territories were, and that was the beauty of all these announcers that we've been talking about, where they were specific for their area. They were great for their area. Lance wouldn't have been necessarily great all across the United States, but for the South and for Tennessee, he was perfect.
Right.
Same thing with Bob Caudle. He was perfect for North Carolina. He was perfect for Virginia. Mm-hmm. What Vince did was, when the big stage came and the audience got broad, he broadened the product and he homogenized it to the point where everybody could see it and like it and enjoy it. And that's not what Fritz did in Texas. He was a Texas promotion. Right. And if you weren't from Texas, you probably didn't get it, you know. And he drew all those big crowds to Cowboy Stadium and all that. But when it came time to broaden it out and go a little bit wider. None of those guys knew how to do that.
Mhm.
And I don't even know if they should have done it. They probably should have just put a fence around their backyard like Jerry Jarrett did, because he lasted the longest.
Right.
But it's like, and I said this on my podcast today, and it's something I've never said before, but it just kind of came to me, and I was talking about this very thing. And I said, this is kind of what happened to wrestling promotions back then. When you have your house and your yard and your car, and there's nothing around it, you're excited about it. You think it looks good. You're like, my yard looks good. I'm happy with my house. My car looks great. I'm glad I have my car. Then all of a sudden, somebody buys the vacant lot next door, and they build a bigger, nicer house than you. They have a nicer, more manicured lawn than you, and they have a newer, more extravagant car than you. All of a sudden, now your place looks terrible.
Right.
And that's what happened to wrestling fans, is that Vince came out with this product, and now all of a sudden the wrestlers and all the things that they were happy with before, now they got a glitzy, glamorous, shiny product to compare it to. Now all of a sudden the local guys look like local guys.
Right.
I mean, that's what happened. And wrestling fans stopped going and supporting the local guys because they were wanting to watch WrestleMania, and they were thinking WrestleMania was going to come to their stadium or their arena or whatever. So they were going to save up and go to that.
Yeah. And you talk about like when this national expansion in cable goes out, it's the famous story of what Terry Funk, when he realizes they can see TBS and they know who Tommy Rich is, it's time to get out.
That's right. Yeah. That actually happened in New Mexico, in Tucumcari, New Mexico, where they stopped to have breakfast every single week. They went to Clovis, and every Sunday they either went to Albuquerque or Clovis, and they stopped in Tucumcari for breakfast. And they stopped there one morning, and the girls all ran to Tommy Rich, and Terry's like, "Uh-oh, well, this is over," you know. And the Funks were the smartest ones, because they got out in 78 and didn't hang around. Well, the other guy, they at least got 20 grand for their promotion. Dick Murdoch and Blackjack Mulligan gave them $20,000 for the promotion, but Roy Shire didn't get anything.
Right.
The NWA Hollywood in LA, they didn't get anything. They just shut down. Vern ended up getting nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, at least Terry and them got out. Bill Watts got something. But most of the other ones, they just sort of disintegrated.
Right. And I think you also hit upon something, and I was sitting here thinking about it while you were expounding on it. Having that person in your office or in your company, like a Jim Barnett or Jerry Briscoe or George Scott, that knew all of those people. I've heard the same thing said about Ronnie West in Continental and Randy Hales in Memphis. Like every, sit down Monday morning, contacting all of the stations, did the show play and all of that, keeping those relationships open. That's so important.
Well, it's one of the things I learned as a CEO, and it's one of the things that I teach my CEO clients to do. And we call it building your power base. And the questions you ask yourself are, okay, how many phone calls do you have to make to get to your mayor of your city? To find out things, or to ask for a favor, or to talk about issues that are going to affect your business? How many phone calls does it take you to get to your state representative? How many phone calls does it take you to get to your senator? How many phone calls did it take for you to get to your governor? Like, do you have to go through 5 people, or do you have the number yourself?
Right.
Well, Jim Barnett had the number to the governor of Georgia. He had the number to President Carter's right-hand people.
Right.
I mean, he built an amazing power base. It was part of the reason he was successful in the United States. It was part of the reason he was successful in Australia. And it was part of the reason he came back to the United States for the second time and was successful again, because he concentrated on the power base. I told a story on the Briscoe Bradshaw show about Les Thatcher. The World's Fair was in Knoxville in 1980, and Jim Barnett had bought Southeastern from Ron Fuller.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jim Barnett was going to come up, and Les Thatcher was doing the television in Knoxville for him. And Jim was going to come up for the World's Fair. And Les Thatcher goes, well, we don't have any tickets. And, you know, Jim, are you going to walk all over that large area for the World's Fair and all that? And he goes, oh, my boy, don't worry about it, you know. And Les Thatcher gets to the World's Fair, and they've got a red carpet rolled out for him, and they've got a golf cart for him to ride around with and around the world. I mean, Jim had called all these people and made it happen, you know, just with a phone call, just with a phone call. And Jim Crockett couldn't do that,
No.
you know, and Jim Crockett didn't have anybody on his staff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of the issue. And Vince surrounded himself with people like that.
Yeah. What you say is I just got a notification on my watch about politics, because we've got different races here in Virginia, and it's election night as we're recording this. But my dad was mayor for 2 different 8-year terms of a little small town, and he always says all politics is local.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter, because you can love who's in the White House, you can love who's in the governor's mansion, but if it's trash day and your trash hasn't been picked up, you're calling the mayor's house, because all politics is local.
Yeah. And Barnett, he was not party specific.
Right.
You know, he had friendships and relationships with all different persuasions of politicians.
Right.
I remember one story we were talking about on the show where somebody wanted to change banks, and he said in Augusta, Georgia. So they had Monday nights were in Augusta, Georgia, and they had a bank there where they deposited the receipts from the show every Monday night after the show. And I think Ole wanted to change banks or something. And Jim goes, oh, we can't do that. Ole said, why? And he goes, well, so-and-so Senator so-and-so is a shareholder in that bank, and he's on the bank board, and he won't like it if we don't do business there. Mm-hmm. And he's always thinking of things like that, you know, which is what made him successful.
Right. And made him very viable when Vince goes national. Vince knew what he was doing.
Yeah, and Jim knew what he was doing.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
absolutely. He knew that Vince had the, you know, and then, you know, later on, Jim went back to Crockett, you know, when he thought Jim Crockett had a chance. Sure. Jim Barnett was everywhere where it was happening. Mm-hmm. You know, when Jim Crockett sold to WCW, Jim Barnett helped broker that deal. And when Ted Turner sold out, or they sold WCW to Vince, Jim Barnett was there. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, he was there for every major event in pro wrestling from 1950 till 2003.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the first television revolution in 1950, he was the right-hand man for Fred Kohler in Chicago. Right. And wrestling at the Marigold was the biggest wrestling show in America. And Jim Barnett was part of the reason why. Yeah.
Wow. But Tony, I want to be very mindful of your time. So I wanted to get in some of your Hall of Fame picks. So I went back and I copied that, at least in a couple of different categories. Your historical category, you voted for Cowboy Bob Ellis, June Byers, Junkyard Dog, Wild Bill Curry, Sputnik Monroe, and Bob Armstrong. Mm-hmm. And you talked about going back and forth, and we're finally swayed on Armstrong, I guess, kind of there at the end. I was surprised that Cowboy Bob Ellis was not in before this.
Yeah, he should have been. But I mean, Dave has said that, you know, that he was it was an omission of, it was just a mistake. we probably should have been in the first class.
In the first class, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very much like Roy Welch and Morse Siegel. I mean, they should have been in the first class too, but they
Right.
weren't. So you deal with it. Cowboy Bob Ellis was a big part of Jim Barnett's first success when he and Johnny Doyle had probably, you could say, the first national promotion in the United States from 1958 to 1964. And Cowboy Bob Ellis was in the main event of a lot of those houses in Cincinnati and Indianapolis and Denver and a lot of those towns. He drew a lot of money there for about a 5 or 6 year period.
Right. I'm surprised. Well, I wasn't, but I really think that it's starting to pick up. And I think Junkyard Dog will get in this year. I believe
so.
he will.
I hope so. My friend Greg Klein has been advocating for that for a long time. And he's really been, for the last 2 or 3 years, he's really been blowing a horn for Junkyard Dog and been providing all these statistics and his drawing power. And, I would like to see that too. I hope that happens. Unfortunately, people have recency bias, and they always kind of remember the last part of something.
Right.
And he was not that great at the end. But man, from 1980 to 1987, he was Superman.
Sure.
And really, really was impactful.
Right. And I think a legitimate argument could be made in 84 and 85. You're talking about the number 2 face behind Hogan in the WWF.
Yeah, he was. And I've always made the argument that Vince wasn't the only one getting talent. I mean, Crockett was getting talent too. And if Crockett would have been in the position in 1984 that they were in 1985, they would have taken JYD.
Right.
I mean, It's not like Vince was the only one that wanted him. He was a commodity that everybody would have wanted if they had had the opportunity.
Right. And that's when Watts kind of sent him out of the area, because if he's there, you can't get all of these younger stars coming in over.
That's right. Right. Yeah, he sent him to North Carolina there for a while and then brought him back as a mask guy for the Cornette feud.
And then I also really want to see Wild Bull Curry and Sputnik Monroe get in.
Yeah. Sputnik Monroe, of course, is close to my heart. I came out with an article about him on Monday. Sputnik Monroe, pro wrestling's barrier breaker, buster.
Right.
Growing up, I heard all the stories about all the things that he did in Memphis and all of that. He's a little bit before my time. I did get to see him in the mid to late 70s. But I missed the best part of his career. But my gosh, what an interesting fella, and also gave Terry Funk his first match.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I did not know that. I have your article to read. Alan Blackstock came out with an article a couple of weeks ago, and that was very in-depth. I really enjoyed that.
Another good friend of mine, Alan, is a great guy. I really appreciate Alan's talent for sure.
Yeah. And there's been kind of, I guess, the last 4 or 5 years, kind of a push to get Wild Bull Curry in. And it's one of those like recency bias things like you talked about before.
I mean, my gosh, the guy had almost a 30-year career. He drew an amazing amount of money in Houston and in Texas. His feuds with Danny McShane and with the people in Texas, where Doc Sarpolis said, hey, people are starting to think that, this is not real. And, we've got to produce blood in some way. So you guys are going to have to start hitting each other with chair shots. I mean, live ones. I mean, really, not working ones, but real ones. Right. Because in Texas, we work snug and our fans have got to believe in this. Well, after a little while, Sarpolis goes, okay, well, we're beating each other to death. So, I've come up with this thing called blading that I think will work, where we can produce the blood without you having to take the hard way chair shot, So Well, Wild Bill was just involved in, or Wild Bull was involved in so many. I mean, he was such a draw in Detroit and in Texas and all around the country, really.
Yeah. And then I have an admitted blind spot. I don't know much about June Byers.
Well, Jeff Lean wrote that great book about Mildred Burke.
Mildred Burke, yeah.
We find a lot out about her. But then my friend John Cosper wrote a great book about June Byers. If anyone's interested in her life and her career, he sells it at his website is called Eat, Sleep, and Wrestle. And John is a Louisville, Kentucky wrestling historian, and his book on June is fantastic.
Mm. And then I'm going to skip over the Japan and the Europe category.
Okay.
I'm not a huge not fan of that. I'm just not aware of a lot of it. I was surprised though when I was looking and I heard other people talk about it that Tiger Jeet Singh was not in already.
Yeah, and I've heard people say he's questionable, as a candidate, but really in those first few years of New Japan, he was Inoki's number one heel. I mean, he and Inoki had an amazing feud in 73, 74, and 75. And he actually put Tiger Jeet Singh over. And Inoki doesn't put that many people over. But he put Jeet Singh over for the NWF world title. And so and then looking at the stuff that he did in Toronto and all of that in the Sheik territory and in the Maple Leaf Gardens, I just think he deserves to be in.
I know, I agree with that. And then your non-wrestler category, Roy Welch, George Scott, Gorilla Monsoon, Morris Siegel, Ted Turner, Grand Wizard, and Bobby Bruns.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't vote for some of the guys like Larry Matazik and for Dave Brown because I just felt like I thought Roy Welch and Morris Siegel were priorities for me.
I would agree with that.
They deserve to be in. And my friend Greg Klein, who's pushed for the Junkyard Dog, he's also pushed for Morris Siegel. He's put all kinds of great information out about Morris. And so I didn't push for Morris as much than I just voted for him. But I really wanted those two to get in. I really want George Scott to have a really good chance. I don't think he'll get in this year, but I hope I've advanced the ball down the field for him a little bit. I just thought Larry and Dave have more years to go where they can get elected, which is really the main reason they didn't get my vote. The reason Ted Turner got my vote is because we wouldn't have wrestling today except for the WWE if it weren't for Ted Turner.
Right.
There would be no WCW without Ted Turner. If he didn't buy Crockett, then we don't get the Monday Night Wars. We don't get WCW. We don't get any of that because nobody else was going to buy that company. And it would have just gone into the ether, and that would have been the end of it. And Vince would have had wrestling in 1988. But Ted Turner was, and he's always been, a great pro wrestling supporter and benefactor. And so I just have an enormous amount of respect for him as an entrepreneur, as a media guy, and as a wrestling fan. So I really wanted to blow the horn for Ted a little bit.
Have you ever heard the story about him buying the Braves?
Maybe it's not coming to my mind right now, but remind me.
The guy who wrote the great book about him in the early 90s about it says he really got it for $1 because they're going in. He's bought the team, they signed all the thing, and there is a vault in the stadium, and it's full of money. They had not deposited any of the concessions for 10 years.
Oh my Lord.
And all of a sudden that money is his. And he's like, that just paid for itself.
Well, if fortune favors people like that.
That's right. That is absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I think like you that Roy Welch and Morris Siegel are I think they're going in. They should have gone in the first class, but I mean, it's just one of those things like you're going to overlook someone. So.
Without Jim Crockett, I mean, with the exception of Jim Crockett Sr., we wouldn't have Southern wrestling would not exist without Roy Welch.
Right.
So, I mean, and I grew up in his territory. the Welches, Roy and Herb, were both of my grandfathers. Both of them, that was their favorite tag team.
Okay.
And so they were just big fans of the Welches. And so I heard about the Welches all the time growing up as a kid. And then after I became a wrestling fan, I went to my grandfathers and asked them a lot of questions about it. And I'm quoted in the new book about Plowboy Frazier, because my grandfather had a feed store, and all of these farmers would come to the feed store. And they loved Plowboy Frazier because he looked like them, he talked like them, and he called everybody neighbor. Well, everybody in my hometown did too.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh man, this is our guy. But all of that was brought into our living rooms by Roy Welch and Nick Goulas. So I just feel like Roy should have been in a long time ago.
Yeah. The other person, when I was talking to Brian, that I want someone to write a book about is the Grand Wizard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the only one of the big three wise men that are not in. And it's funny because he was always, to me, the number one manager guy, because he mainly had the world champion. Usually Blassie had the tag teams and Albano had kind of the different off the wall people, but Grand Wizard typically had the world champion. He had Superstar Graham, he had Stasiak, he had all these guys. And so I'm like, why is he not in? And on my show, Brian was on my Hall of Fame show when we had our panel talk about it. And we all agreed that if he would not have died right before the national expansion, he would have played a big part in it, I think.
Right. And I was talking with Brian about that. Bobby Heenan talks about that in his Hall of Fame speech. He's like, they already had the Grand Wizard, who was great, Freddie Blassie, who was great, and Lou Albano, who refused to be fired. So,
well, the way I talked about it on my show was, Freddie Blassie looked like to me that he could get back in the ring. Like he looked like he could defend himself. Like he looked like he could still wrestle.
Right.
And Albano, I never really took him seriously because of the way he looked and the way he behaved and the way he acted. I'm like, this guy's a clown, I wasn't really afraid of him. But the Grand Wizard, he just looked like an evil dude. And to me, as a kid, I thought, that evil dude is manipulating all these guys and causing them to do all these bad things. That must be a really, really evil guy. Right. So as a kid, the Grand Wizard was over with me as a scary type heel manager. So I always just kind of had that. He always had that aura with me,
Yeah. And then another blind spot for me is Bobby Bruns.
Bobby Bruns. Well, I probably wouldn't have as much of a knowledge about him, except I lived in Missouri for almost 30 some odd years. And in doing that, I learned a lot about St. Louis wrestling history, and I learned a lot about Kansas City wrestling history. And Bobby Bruns was probably the most innovative and best booker Sam Mushnick ever had.
Okay.
And he booked a Mushnick during the 50s. And he also was, and this doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with this, but he is the guy who had he had Ricky Dozan's rookie match.
Okay.
So Ricky Dozan's first pro match was with Bobby Bruns. And Bobby Bruns in 1953 was instrumental in pro wrestling coming to the nation of Japan. And he basically is right there with Ricky Dozan as far as bringing pro wrestling in and making it the cultural phenomenon that it became in Japan. So he's a very, very important historical figure that unfortunately he's kind of been forgotten. And I don't think he'll get in this year, but I wanted to vote for him and I wanted to bring some attention to him. And I'll probably write a really nice in-depth article about him next year for the Hall of Fame.
Nice. Well,
he's definitely somebody that we should learn more about.
Absolutely. Tony, I said I wanted to be very mindful of your time. We've gone about twice the amount that I've told you, but I've been having a ball. I've learned so much. Yeah,
me too. So. And that's the thing about having these great conversations with folks like you, Joy, is you sit down, you start talking, and the time just flies by, and you enjoying yourself, and that's what's important. It doesn't matter how much time we've spent; it's just we had fun, you know.
That's right. That's right. But before I let you go ahead and plug any and everything you have, my friend.
Oh my gosh! Well, you can follow me on X at Tony Richards 4. You can come over and join our Facebook group at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. We upload all the video episodes of our show to YouTube, so we have a YouTube Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel channel. Our audio version of our podcast is available anywhere you get podcasts. You download your podcast. And then we talked about it at the beginning of the show, my Substack, Tony Richards 4, or you can search for Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. I have a daily history newsletter. So if you're a pro wrestling history enthusiast, you like to learn about history and you like to start your day like Joey Harris, then you need to subscribe to my Substack, and you'll get that daily chronicle in your email box every single morning. And then you'll get our premium subscribers. And I don't know if people are premium subscribers because they enjoy my writing or if they just want to support the work that I'm doing. But whatever the reason is, I really appreciate the premiums who they take their hard-earned money, $5 a month, $50 a year if you want to save $10, and they put it into the work that I'm doing and help support me in doing it. And I'm just very grateful and thankful for all our premium subscribers as well.
Nice.
And then in 2026, I'm hoping in July 2026, we'll have the Dory Funk Sr. book ready. Dory Funk Sr., the king of the Texas death matches. And then in 2027, Jim Barnett, the wizard of professional wrestling. So I'm hoping.
My wedding anniversary is in July, and it'll be our 10th anniversary, and we went on our honeymoon to Prince Edward Island up in Canada. I am trying to convince my wife before that to take a detour to Iowa because they moved it a little bit earlier because it's usually right around our thing. I'm like, I can't convince her to go to Iowa for our anniversary. So, well, I'm hoping I can get her to let me go there. I
wish you'd come. I wish you'd come be with us because it's a great time. Your wife will have a great time too. Brian Ferguson, who wrote the Vern Gagne book and is a friend of mine. He's also the president of they're revitalizing the WFIA, the Wrestling Fans International. So Brian was there having the WFIA book, and his wife came. I got to meet her, Sheila. She'd never been to one of these things before, and she just had a ball. She had a blast. Your wife would have a blast. She would have a ball, and we would love to see you come. I've been working with Chad Olson. We don't have it in ink yet, but it's in pencil that I'm going to be doing a history session during the Hall of Fame. So, probably an hour in one of the meeting breakout rooms or something. We haven't decided what the subject's going to be, but probably going to be on Funk or Barnett or something like that. So I hope you get to come be with us.
I do too. I'm definitely getting the book either way. That is on my list.
Well, Jerry Briscoe always tells us every year when he gets up and talks, he says, next year, I want you to bring somebody with you. I want you to invite somebody. So I'm inviting you. Come on down, you and your wife.
Absolutely. I this past year have been taking the time to get more wrestling books and to learn more of the history. I've got Jim Cornette's is on the way. Yeah. I'll probably get it tomorrow. It says Friday, but it's in Richmond, and that's like 45 minutes away from me. So.
Yeah. Well, Jim grew up in Louisville. I grew up in Paducah. He grew up about 220 miles northeast of me, and he's about a year older than I am. So we grew up in seeing the same stuff, so a lot of times he talks on his show about things that I understand, and he's probably like, oh, nobody probably understands that. And I'm like, I was there, Jim.
Right. You can follow me on Facebook, Threads, and Instagram at The Joey Harris. If you like the show, please leave a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast app. I would really appreciate it. We can also be found on Spotify and YouTube. Just search for The Cup of Joe Wrestling Show, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Tony, thank you so much for joining me. And for Tony, this is Joey saying so long from the heart.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
The Cup of Joe Wrestling Show is a production of Baby Kangaroo Media.